Mitali, thank you so very much for joining. I know I say this every time, but being able to host these events for New College Berkeley and for Radix is so fun because I get to talk to really, really cool people, read cool books. It's a real joy. And New College Berkeley and Radix also have a history of talking about the importance of creating and art. And this is, in part what this your book is all about. So being able to do that is just lovely, lovely. Um, a favorite writer of mine, G.K. Chesterton, said, "The arts exist to show forth the glory of God." And I think we would probably all agree with that. In the last number of years, the church has stepped up its focus on talking about the importance of creating and culture making. And Christianity has always talked about that, but it's something that's becoming increasingly popularized. And that's really good because there is something important about the idea of culture making. God has gifted all of us with the ability to create art that imparts goodness, truth, and beauty to the world into our world. And so to not create when we could actually might be a terrible thing to contemplate. But the good news is, there's lots of people who do create. And a beautiful example of a creative person is Mitali Perkins. Not only does she have a number of books behind her name, an enviable number of books, might I add, and one turned into a movie, she is a great encourager and she incites others to be creative. In today's event, she'll be talking a good deal about her latest book, Just Making, a guide for compassionate creatives. And it is a truly lovely book. Now, also, since you're smart, you can probably see the just making part. So it's about making, but it's also about justice. And to read it was lovely for a whole variety of reasons. It's packed with all kinds of writers' names. She's got Buchner and Fujimura, Andy Crouch, Nietzsche, Elizabeth Browning, Father Gregory Boyle, and she touches on from philosophy to theology to cooking to poetry. It's packed with lots of really good, digestible, insightful points that really made me enjoy it a lot more. But in terms of the justice part, at the very beginning, Mitali says, "Isn't it selfish to stay in the solitude of my own study and generate stories?" Something she does a lot of. "Why should I keep making art when suffering, injustice, and oppression are wreaking havoc on the planet? Why should you?" she asks. "How does one sustain creative life given the seemingly selfish investment it takes to create beautiful things? Our gifts could be used to alleviate suffering and fight injustice. How dare we retreat and create?" However, as the book goes on, we learn that by creating, we actually can contribute to justice. But I will let her tell you about that. Just a few comments on housekeeping. This event will be recorded and a link will be set out later when it's made available. I'm going to be talking to Mitali for about 55 minutes or so, and then she will be taking questions from you, our audience. You can start sending questions at any time. Feel completely, totally free to do that. If you send them to admin, and then if you don't, unless you don't want your name mentioned, then say that. Otherwise, I will mention your name along with a question. Mitali, thank you so very much for sharing yourself with us and your words and your heart with the rest of the world. Just to start us off, so you have written a heap of things over the years and have some really cool stories about your journey as an artist, but also a person, as a person. Could you, for those of us who don't know you as much, could you share a little bit about your story and what led you to where you're at?
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me, Matthew. And thanks to all of you who showed up. It's fun to see some familiar faces and some new ones. I am Mitali Perkins, and I am the third of three daughters in a Bengali immigrant family. We immigrated here when I was 7 years old to New York City. And I think many of you have heard that my oldest sister's name is Sonali, then came Rupali, and now Mitali, right? So Sonali means gold and Rupali means silver. Mitali means friendly. So kids are always like, "Oh, you didn't get the precious jewel." And I say, "Nope, I got the most precious thing of all." So we were all born in India, but my parents are actually refugees from what is now Bangladesh. And that's defined a lot of my stories and my books. I'd never thought in a million years that I was going to be a career writer. That is really not an option for a refugee immigrant family who's sacrificed so much to come to the United States and give us great educations. Um, so there was not many options career-wise other than being an engineer or a doctor for us. And so but yeah, I found myself drawn to the arts so much. I always penned stories and poems, and I really attribute that creativity that was always a part of me to the books that I read as a kid. I just read voraciously as a child. I went to the library. In fact, yesterday I did a school visit virtually in Manhattan, and the kids always ask, "Why are you a writer?" And I just tell them that stories made my soul strong. I went to the library every week for the 4 years we lived in Flushing, Queens. 7 books a week. I had them do the math with me. 7 times 50 weeks, let's say, with 2 off. That's 350 a year. That's for the 4 years. That's 1,400 books, 1,400 heroes' journeys that I read that widened my heart, widened my mind, helped me to see myself as a hero. And I began to see the power of stories, how they absolutely changed my life. And I also began to want to engage with justice. I would give that the main reason for that. I would attribute that to the stories I was reading. It was a Little Women when the first scene, the four March sisters give up their Christmas feast and walking down the street to share it with a family who didn't have anything to eat. It was Sarah Crew and a little princess who um no, is that right? Yeah, Sarah Krug, and little princess who was so hungry and had 7 hot cross buns. By some miracle, she found some money, and then it was her giving the buns away. All of that really shaped my heart. So I wanted a career that would eradicate hungry children from the world. And then how I found my way to being a writer, that's a more circuitous route, and how I figured out that that was really the way that I could bring justice in the way that I longed to do into this planet that was so desperately longing for the shalom that I was beginning to get to taste, to see through the stories I was reading. And I wanted to do that through stories.
The idea of the power of story in reading this book and then listening to some of your interviews. I love that you talk about the importance of stories, because I think in in a North American, I think in a world culture, it's easy to think, well, a story is fiction and it's not real, and people will talk about, the importance of the real. So when you're talking about its power to shape and to shift perspectives, that is really, really, really cool.
Yeah, I think there's a quote that's misattributed to Damon of Athens, but I think it's some Scottish minister who first said it. But he said the quote says, "Give me the songs of a nation, and you can keep its laws." Right?
Mm.
It's the idea about shaping an entire culture based on the songs we sing and the stories we tell, and how that delves into the heart and mind um in a way that nothing else can. So
When a person reads your book and others, it's obvious that you read a lot. Do you want to speak a little bit to maybe the importance of reading broadly?
well, I mean, I too have fallen prey to a lot of surfing and mindless reading and bits here and bits there, like we all have, but there's nothing like a good deep read. It wasn't that, I have a librarian friend here, Susie. Do you remember that book by Nicholas Carr, The Shallows, that came out a long time ago? There's about maybe it's like 10, 12 years ago, but I remember reading about the idea of deep reading, and that can only really come in the context, he argued, in the context of a longer read, where you sit with that book and the argument of that book for a while, or a story with a longer read. And of course, there's the page turning of a physical book. There's the space created for the reader to imagine that allows the story to go deep because you're working with the writer. There's something about the very shape and structure of a book that allows us to do that kind of deep thinking and reading that we so desperately need. And there's also memorizing, and I don't know about you, Matthew, but maybe there's a book from childhood that you read and reread, or a certain books that lines of by heart, and or poetry. Those things that we memorize, Nicholas Carr makes the argument that those feed the back of our brain while we sleep. And they feed our imagination. They give us the words that we need to shape news stories. So yeah, deep reading, deep, broad reading. I think that could go alongside with some of the more quick and shallow reading that we do. I'm not discounting quick and shallow reading. I just think we need to have that deep, broad reading as well, which, it's tougher to do, but I still do read books. Sad. Yeah, I do. I'm not ashamed to admit it. I read books. Oh, page turning ones. Yeah.
When you talked about deep reading, and because so you write for children, not just children, but you write for children. Are there um, stories that you include in your writing about the importance of reading and kind of inciting children to read a little bit more, to be curious about the world, to develop their seeing eyes?
Ooh. Well, I try to. A lot of my characters, some of my characters are readers, and I try to include, like my most recent novel for middle schoolers, will Hope in the Valley. She's a poet, and I included the poetry that I wrote when I was 11 and 12 in that book. And she writes those poems, but I wrote those poems. So I think the joy of words and wordplay, but half my career is speaking and half my career is writing. I just did a visit with my friend Susie and visited a couple of schools down in the DC area. Susie's a DC public librarian, and so I visited there, and I do a lot of talking to kids, and I walk in the classroom and they see this old Indian lady and they're like, boring. What's she gonna say? And it's always so fun just to the school in Manhattan. What I did is I won't show you guys. I said, I want to show you guys something. And all these fifth grade boys are like so skeptical. This is yesterday about the fact that I'm going to say anything of interest. And so what I did is I actually flexed my arm or and I showed them my bicep. And I said, the only reason I have such an awesome bicep is because I go to the gym and I work it out. And I said, that's what stories do. They make your soul so strong. You've got to find those stories. I don't know if I said that with you, Susie, I showed off my bicep. So basically I go around the country and the world showing off my biceps to fifth graders and trying to have them remember that stories do that for your. But yeah, I do it a lot through the speaking. I try to really convince them that there's nothing like the story to make your soul strong. But I also try to. My characters often read and love words and are often writers as well.
Mhm. And you yourself, in just making you talk a bit about your background and in some other interviews, about probably your parents, their first idea was not to have a daughter who was going to be a writer. And probably your culture, even more than in the North American one, would be more focused on what was it you mentioned? I think there's three options. There's a lawyer, a doctor, and a doctor or something.
Yeah, doctor, engineer, or doctor. Those were our three choices.
Okay.
Yeah. So, yeah, and I think when you're a new American, and as I said, my parents went through a war. They lost everything in the war. It's not like you have much room. Almost like charity or philanthropy, that is a privilege. That's a privilege of people who have come from some means to think about giving away. So we were never really raised with this idea of whatever philanthropy, justice, giving, tithing, none of that. And not that my parents weren't wonderful people, but that they were barely trying to put rice on the table for us, right? So they wanted to give us the best. They were focused on us. So, yeah, so that wasn't a career choice for me. Neither of those choices to work in development as I wanted to. I wanted to go overseas. I wanted to help bring justice to kids who didn't have sink wells, do something related to fighting poverty, alleviating poverty. That was not an idea they entertained. Neither was art a viable career. You don't saunter in and say, "Hey, I'm gonna support you in your old age with a career as a children's book writer, mom and dad. Great idea." They're not gonna jump up and down and say, "Oh, we are so very happy that you have done this." That's not gonna happen. So, but now, of course, my dad before he died, my mom now still very proud and very happy. And I do have a sustainable. I write about that in the book, how few people get to have a sustainable career in the arts, and I'm so grateful that I'm able to do that. So, Thanks to my parents, though, because a lot of that education did pay off in the career, in as a good education does in every career.
Mhm. And I think obviously for you, the word vocation would be very much accurate to describe what you're, participating in.
Yeah, definitely. I love that idea of vocation. I think it's so much more than, what we do to earn money, right? It's about how we make the world, how we further shalom, the flourishing of human lives, our own. And I talk about that in Just Making. I talk about the three people or parties around art, the giver of art and the receiver of art, and then the wider community, and how the creative life can bring shalom and flourishing both to myself as the giver of it, to myself as a receiver of your art, and then to the wider community also. So, and I think that is the key to vocation is I'm put on this earth for a short time. And as Frederick Buechner said, where my great joy meets the world's deep need is one way to look at vocation. And I like to think of it as the way that we were designed to further the shalom of both ourselves as others and the wider community. Yeah, definitely.
Something, and it starts out at the beginning of the book, is sometimes it's easy for people to think that art has to be something that's very, it takes you many years to develop. And I mean, in lots of cases it does. Writers, people who write poems and movies. But there also is this element in creating, and you talked about the first thing that God did was sow, and that a person can be so artistic in expressing themselves in cooking, in sewing, in these small things that sometimes people don't really think to be, well, that's just the average thing. But it's not so much, actually. We are creative creatures by nature, and we can express in so many ways, and that's really, really valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the book definitely focuses on a lot of the writers that you just quoted that I mentioned in the book were men, white men, which is fine. I've learned a lot from a lot of that demographic, but the ones that I'm focusing on in the book are those who are on the margins of power, the ones who keep making despite the odds, mostly women who maybe have endured war, great deprivation, a lot of suffering, and yet continue to make. And from them, I want to draw um, ideas of how to keep making because anytime you make anything beautiful, good, or true, I think, Matthew, we get pushback because chaos hates that. Chaos hates our creativity, and the enemies of good and true and beautiful things, whether spiritual or human, hate that. And so there will be pushback. And not only is there pushback from external forces when we start to make, there's also pushback from within us. And that's also very difficult to push through because there are voices that will tell us, what is this? I'm sewing something, cooking something. Is this of any good? Or this book, it didn't sell, whatever it is, we have all this pushback inside of ourselves that make us, and whenever you feel that pushback, you know that something good is going on, because if it's not worth anything, there's not going to be pushback, right? So I look to these women on the margins, and I love to learn from people who are like my friend. Oh, behind me, you can see these two pieces right here. I bought those two pieces when I visited a home in my native Kolkata of girls who were rescued from human trafficking. And this was one of the girls, her art. She loved the moon. And so I bought them because I found them really beautiful and touching, how much sky she puts and how little land. And it just her when I talked to her and I heard her story of hope, it just speaks to me of just what's beyond the horizon. And so I love those pieces, and I buy pieces like that. She just paints. She loves to paint, and it gives her joy. It gave me joy. So I learned from her. She was one of my mentors, 16 years old, and a beautiful young woman. And then on the other end, I have a picture I wish I could show you. It's hanging in our entry. Stan and Carol have seen it. Have any of you if you've been to my house? You've seen it. You've come to our home in the entry. It's this big piece of modern art painted by my friend Virginia Nepper Doyle. In the book, I have like 10 different mentors, artist mentors who share little parts of their stories, and Virginia is one of them. She was a talented oil and watercolor, lots of different media artists, and had shows and galleries. And then she began to lose her vision to macular degeneration. And she also went through a very deep period of grief. She lost her son. She lost people that she loved deeply, and she was grieving. And so I went to visit her, and she has a garden, and there was a big canvas in the garden, and there was Virginia at age 89, grieving and pouring buckets of colorful paint across this canvas with all her might. And because all she could see was color. And what she was creating was just vibrant and joyful. And I thought, I've got to have that piece, I said, when I saw the finished piece. And so, she sold it to me, and it was basically a big gift. But I see it every time, and I think of her just generating joy in the middle of her pain, and how that piece of art speaks to me of her perseverance and of her, what that art gave to her as well as myself. So these are my mentors, Matthew, are the ones who create against the odds, because I don't have those odds. Not yet. I might down the road more, but right now they inspire me to keep going when I get bad reviews. Books don't sell. Books get rejected still. Books, what else happens? I mean, you think, oh, if I could only just get a book published, and then you get it published, and then it goes out of print, and nobody reads it, or it just gets terrible reviews, or whatever happens to it, and you think, wait, what happened? I wrote this book. But it's a hard, rough career. It's not for the faint-hearted to write books. And so that's who inspires me to keep going. My second book, I think some of you have heard, my first book won a contest. I thought, oh, this will be a fun hobby. And then my second book was rejected after asking for revisions, significant revisions. 22 different editors rejected that manuscript. So it took 11 years between my first book and my second book. And it was in that 11 to 12-year period that I decided, why am I not giving up? Am I insane? I mean, is the definition of insanity doing the same thing again and again and getting no results? Yes, well, then I either must be insane, or maybe this is a vocation. Maybe I love this. And I would go on retreat. I would say, what am I doing? God, help me. And every single time I would hear, I like your writing, darling. Keep going. And so I did. And I finally got that book published. When that second book came out, I said, well, I've always felt like I'm behind God in my art, that he's going, oh, I love this. Keep doing this. This is fantastic. This is thrilling. And I'm like, it's bad. I want to do it. No, it's very important. I have books for kids. And God's like, you're doing amazing, powerful work. Get going. So I had to keep pace with God in my career, in my vocation. And I'm finally almost there. I'm almost like, yeah, this is an amazing thing I do. I love it. And so I can hear God going, finally, she's getting it. I love her work. Why doesn't she love her work? So anyway, that's the long story of how it became and I think my 24th book is coming out in 2027. So I've been doing it that's the only other thing that qualifies me to write this book. Because I hate giving advice. I hate getting advice, but I hate giving advice. And and I'm not an advice giving kind of person, but this one I thought, well, you know what? I've kept going. And I just, so there must be something I could say that'll help other people keep going. So it's about, hopefully it will be. Although today I thought about how funny this would look on the BART train, like reading it, and I would be like declaring to everyone that I am a compassionate creative. It's a little bit embarrassing, like, but I'm reading, a little virtue signaling. You could take the cover. I love what they did on the inside. You could take the jacket cover off, and then they have this beautiful little design that they did, which I love. Yeah.
I hadn't even looked at that. I didn't see it.
Yeah,
Cool. Something when you're talking about the rejections, and you mentioned Madeleine L'Engle, and there's other. I think it's probably fair to say that most successful writers have to deal with a huge amount of rejection, and that would take a lot of. You were saying a little bit earlier about okay, why am I doing this? For what purpose? And the fact that, the voice you heard from God, it's so encouraging. But it would take a lot of tough skin to be able to continue to push through. Do you have any other advice for people who are, maybe they've only done one or two, or maybe they're just starting and they've been rejected numerous times. Maybe it's just short stories or essays. What other advice would you have for people?
Mhm. Advice in order to keep nurturing your art or to keep,
Just
yeah,
just
it's the
keep going despite
all
the
the
rejections.
and the turmoil, external global turmoil right now. I mean, wars around us and all the division and everything. So given all that external pressure, how do you quiet your mind to create? Because you need to do that in order to create, right? How do you? So I lean into some ancient practices in the book as and they're, although I did try to write the book so that my author friends who aren't in the church could access it, but they come out of the church, the practices, for example, of the fast. And when you're a word person, it involves fasting from words, going into silence and solitude, and really taking time away from scrolling and reading 1 day a week. There's that practice. Also, fasting is important in terms of to combat gluttony, which I talk about vices that from within, and one of them is that idea of gluttony. And how I define gluttony for a writer, it's that idea of sort of numbing our pain or ignoring our pain by whatever our current method of numbing is. I don't know what your current method of numbing is, but mine usually involves, like, I don't know, memes about dogs and soldier homecoming videos or whatever I'm watching for hours, and then potato chips, other things I use to just numb the pain that we all endure both in our own lives, and it's just part of the human race, right? Being human means we suffer. And you can get, of course, I'm not saying we don't need some substances to help us through that are medicated, if we're, because I think artists, one of our jobs is to convey the depth of human emotion and human suffering, and also all the wide range of joy and suffering. We have to feel it, and so we can, if we don't do justice to feeling it, but through the gluttony of whatever we're using to numb, um, it will not serve our art, nor will it serve our receivers of our art. As I bring up that example of seeing, there was a time last year or 2 years ago, I was walking in the Meyer Gardens in Grand Rapids, Michigan, closer to you than we are here in California. But it's a beautiful garden. It has sculpture in it and flowers. I love it when different art mix and mingle together. Like I like going to a museum and listening to the music that matches that what I'm seeing. So I was just at the Isabella Stewart Gardner looking at medieval Italian art. So of course I put on my Luciano Pavarotti was walking with me through the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum. And then I like to mix those. So in the gardens there's beautiful flowers, but there's also sculptures, and there was this full huge Rodin sculpture there of Eve. And I was really trying to confront the emotion of shame, and I was restless. I didn't want to. I didn't want to think about shame. But there she was, right? Off balance, covering herself, hiding her face. Huge. Everybody could see her. And oh, that was just so resonating with something I was dealing with in my own life, being, maybe it was, I've been a minister's wife for a long, long time. So sort of that whole being on public display, and oh, just the whole thing was too much for me. But I made myself stay there and contemplate the sculpture. And as I did, I could feel, I talk about this practice of the loving gaze of art, both our gaze upon art as well as being seen by the art. And in that moment, I felt that power of being seen by this piece of art, that it was part of the human condition, and that I was being seen as I was seeing Eve. And so the whole thing was deeply comforting to me. And I thought, what if Rodin had pulled back a bit, had made her less vulnerable, had made her less exposed, but he didn't. And I was the beneficiary that day. Mm.
One of the things that I appreciated you were talking about, so the gluttony thing, but you also talk about other destructive interior forces. And I think you mentioned, I read it a couple years back, De Young's book. It's got a picture of the apple in the front. You quote from
The
it.
great
But
vices. Yeah,
thank you.
driven.
Yes. And I mean, that's for everybody. That's not just for artists. That's for everybody. Because we can think sometimes that, well, maybe if I practiced more, or if I worked harder, or other things that are more surfacey, but we don't deal with some of the things. And each of us have proclivities for our own. I mean, for some it might be sloth, though sloth is not just being lazy. Sloth is more than just that, as you talk about. But it's important for us to consider, to be fully human, we have to realize what these interior forces are doing. And I really appreciated that you made that in the book as you did. Do you want to say anything more about that?
Well, I do think that there are practices that will help us counter some of these things that are, whether I do some Ignatian practice with the examine, and that's of course the idea that comes with being quiet and still is that you have to face your own stuff, which is never fun, right? But there is a way to bring that into the light and be forgiven that we have so beautifully in the church. But there's also something that we can do. There's something I listened to Father Timothy Gallagher's whole series on the Ignatian practices, and he talks about acts of penitential courage that help to right us when we're off and when we're not calibrated, when we don't have accounts with ourselves, our art will suffer, right? We'll come up, like for example, the sin of pride, the vice of pride. It the idea that I'm going to change the world with my art, and so I have this strong message that I'm going to preach at you through my art, then art veers into the field of propaganda or into the field of sort of over sentimentalized kind of kitsch that is like patriotic, or so it loses it's the sweet spot of being true. And but yet if we bring that pride into the light, Father Gallagher says there's usually an act of penitential courage that will be shown to us that we can do that will help us to recalibrate. It's not just about the confession and the receiving of forgiveness. It's more like it's something that we have to do with our hands, something usually bodily. And so I talk about the vice of vainglory, which is like my besetting thing. I think the writer's world, you compare yourself we have sales rankings and reviews and awards, and other people always get them. And then you're sitting there sort of stewing. And so there's one practice I talk about to combat vainglory, and that is called, that I titled, but it relates to this act of penitential courage. And it's about embracing moments of mortification. And that's what I recommend strongly for most of us who create art and want to do it for a lifetime. Moments of mortification will come, and I can describe one if you'd like, Matthew, from my book. I can share an example. So we had signings in the book world where if we have a book out, like right now, American Library Association convention is happening, or in a couple of days, and I didn't even get invited this year. So, okay. So I could feel a little vainglory stirring up. I'm like, oh, I have a book coming out. I didn't get invited. Oh, okay. Well, but sometimes I have been invited to those. And then, so my third book came out. No, my second book came out, Monsoon Summer, finally came out. And this was my first experience, the moment of mortification, because I was so excited. My second book had come out. I'd done it. I was a writer, dang it. This was it. And I got invited to the American Library Association convention in Boston, Massachusetts to sign. And I'm like, I have arrived. And so I show up at the convention hall and I go over to the author signing tables, and then my heart sort of plummets because I see that I'm in between, to my left, the very handsome and personable Mo Willems, author of all those pigeon books, is at the table to my left. To the table to my right is the amazing, at that time, right, like had just written, I think, I don't know what he had just written, but it was the amazing young adult author, John Green, equally handsome and personable. So John Green and Mo Willems are on either side of me, and I knew I was doomed. And sure enough, the doors open and librarians pour in, and long line for Mo Willems, long line for John Green. Not one person. And Mitali comes to Mitali Perkins tables, and it's so visible. It's like public, and my Asian little shame self is like, I'm mortified. This is mortifying. So there's my moment of mortification. What do you do? Well, the temptation is for me is always to flee. I am not like in that fight, flight, whatever those faint responses. Flee or faint. But the flee response was really strong. After about 20 minutes, it was an hour signing. I thought, I gotta get out of here. I cannot stand. My cheeks were hot. I was just like so mortified and so frustrated and so I don't know. It was really a tough moment. But I thought to myself, I was a mom of my boys were little, not little-ish, and I thought, I got this manuscript I'm working on. It's in my bag. I've got 40 minutes left. Maybe I should use this as a writing time. That thought came to my head in the middle of all the mortification. And so I said, I'm going to do that. So I pulled out my satchel and I got my manuscript out and I began to work on it. And, I write about the power of flow. And that's what happened in the moment. I began to forget. I was just thinking about my story. What noun? What verb? Oh, look at this. Cross that out. This would be better here. And I began to just dance with my story and we were flowing. And then I think it's because it was my first time I was embracing mortification. There was going to be much more mortification ahead in my career. So God was good to me that day, very good to me, to remind me to stay and embrace these moments because I don't know, that day, sometimes good things don't happen. That day, I look up and there was this redheaded woman there and she said, oh, hi, I read Monsoon Summer. I could see her. She'd come over from John Green's line and said, what are you working on? And I said, oh, I'm working on this book about a rickshaw driver's daughter and she wants to help her family make money. It's fully set in Bangladesh. And she said, oh, that sounds really good. I'm Judy O'Malley. I'm an editor at Charlesbridge. I would love to see that. Can you send that to me? And so that's how that book, which had already been rejected about 14 times, ended up getting published. And so I think it was one of those moments that God gave me to say, there's going to be moments ahead. If you can trust me and just stay there. And that act that day was to really love my work. That was my act of penitential courage that day. But there have been other acts that I describe in the book that I've been a couple of times where there's been further moments of mortification that I've had to and God always shows you a way. I think in those moments, there's always a way that you can recalibrate. And what happens when it comes to vainglory, what happens is kind of miraculous. Inside, you're just got that feeling like, oh, I'm not invited to the American line. I'm not invited. No one's in my line. And you just think it's just so awful to feel like that inside yourself. You're just longing to be recalibrated. Please get me out of this tangle of vainglory because it's sucking all the joy, all the air, everything out of my life. I don't want to be there anymore. And then always a way forward is presented. And so I gave an example in the book of another time, fast forward my career, maybe 15 years, where there was another pretty bad moment of mortification. And that in that way that and there's a quote I think it's from Climactus that talks about to correct vainglory, it's a 4-step process he describes. And the fourth is always some action that you do with your body that allows you to recalibrate that. And it's amazing. It's a small thing. It's a shift. It's staying and looking at that road down picture. Sometimes it just involves staying. And sometimes it involves doing something. And then you get that freedom in your side of your soul where that vainglory is no longer dominating. It's like it flees away and you're back to yourself, to your free and joyful self. And that's so healing and wonderful when that happens. But it's always a struggle. It's always a struggle. And yet I think the more moments that you have, the more I look forward now to those moments of mortification. I'm like, come on, let's see what God's going to do on this one. Let's see what's going to happen in the way forward for me here. So it's always kind of an exciting adventure. It's a subtext of my career that God shows me. It's really fun.
And when you write, for anybody who hasn't read, you are so incredibly vulnerable when you're writing about these things. I was sitting down at this desk, and I've got my making notes out, and as I was reading, and it goes into one thing, and I go, oh, and I so appreciated that you shared that because it doesn't just humanize you to me, but also what the good response is. Because when we read that, and happily, there's a good story afterwards, but you read that and you go, okay, I can learn via something like that. Like if Mitali did that, you know what? I should be able to do that as well. It's a really good example. Like, wow, it was really, really good.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, once you get older, it's so much easier just to say, yeah, I suck, you suck, let's suck together. Easy to say. It's like, welcome to the mess of the world. I'm messy, you're messy, we're all broken messes, but here we are together. So let's do this thing.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm. If I could, I think it's important for you. You talk in the book about how it's important to help artists who are just starting out. So, you know, you showed the paintings off the back. And I remember listening to Amanda Palmer's The Art of Asking. And she was talking about, you know, how she kind of went from kind of nothing to something bigger. And one of the stories that really, really stuck out was the importance of asking. Don't be prideful to ask, too prideful to ask. But then the other one was, as a person who's going in, seeing someone, whether it's food or sewing or maybe it's smallish art or some little hobby thing, it's so important to support those artists who are doing those because, and especially if they're female, they come from a background where they're supporting the family. It's really important to do that, not just as an act of encouragement, which it is, but it also helps support them. And I really, really appreciated that you brought that out because that also is connected to like the act of just making, like being justice minded.
Yes, right. Yeah, my book that's coming out in the fall is set in the tea estates of Darjeeling, and it's about a daughter of a Nepali tea plucker. Because I drink a lot of tea, and so I have to ask the question, well, who makes the tea? And do they make any money off this $6 cup of chai that I'm buying in the store? And follow that chain of so I do like to ask that question. It's about who made the thing that you're consuming, whether it's art or any kind of product, who made it is important to me. And a lot of times it is maybe made by women's hands on the borders of power. So, so that is an important question. And I think economic power is so important for, especially for women. And so, yeah, we talk about arts and crafts, right? And crafts are always looked down on, like, oh, there's these really famous artists and they're, the high art. And then there's this kind of low crafty art that usually women do. Some of it's quilting, embroidery, that kind of thing. And it's never valued in the markets the way that high art is, but there's something about it, like especially quilting. I talk about quilting in my book. Quilting goes across all different cultures. And just think about the idea of quilting. You take scraps of broken, torn fabric and you make it into something beautiful. If that's not in and of itself redemptive and glorious, I don't know. That the very act of quilting. And it's women usually together communally. And studies have been done about how when I talk about benefits for the receiver, the giver, and the wider community, of course, um, quilting, quilts keep us warm. It gives us so much. There's so much beauty to them. But then there's the idea of women quilting together and sharing their stories as they quilt, and how that has brought so much healing to women around the whole globe. That as they make, they share stories, and that brings them that idea of shalom. But then of course you think about the stories like of these African American Black women who made quilts and they sold them at a pittance, like just nothing, if they got to sell them at all. And then they were resold and resold until they're really making a lot of money now, but not for that original maker. And there's an injustice to that. So I think always asking that question about who's making it and how can they benefit is an important one for us, as especially as followers of Christ. So not that it's going to make it right, but yeah, and I like to meditate on the hands that make it and think about and learn about them. And if I can travel there and listen to them and admire them and gaze at them, I know those are seem like small things in the world full of economic injustice, but they really aren't small. They affirm the dignity of the individual creator. So I try to do what I can, but not always great at it, but I'm trying to grow in that.
Mhm, mhm. And I think that brings as well the role of, and you talked about this, but I think a writer or a painter or whoever, it can be seen as an individualistic exercise or activity. But, and you talked about the gaze and other things, it's probably important that we think of art making as something that actually is involved in the community, and often because of, and especially in a Western individualistic culture, it's me, I'm making my reading, my writing, my, as compared to this larger thing. So I think you would agree that having a mindset of the importance of community is really important to the artist's work.
Yeah, right. And there's that, there's the idea of authority, right? I am the author of this work. I have the copyright. I own it. It is my work. I have authority. That is definitely a Western way of looking at it, because my view of it is that when I write a story for kids, and a kid, let's say there's a dairy farmer's daughter, it's a book that's fully set in India, and it's got nothing to do with her culture. She's a dairy farmer's daughter, and she writes to me a letter, and she says, I read Secret Keeper 7 times. It's my favorite book. She's never been outside of rural Indiana, and she just loves it. She's never met an Indian person in her life. And then she tells me for 7 pages about all her connections to that story. Well, she's made that story her own. It's gone beyond me now. It belongs to both of us, right? It's actually become a collaborative work now, because she's made it into something I never could have dreamed of it becoming. And then and so seeing your work in that way, yes, of course she doesn't have the copyright and the authority, but I do. But so what? The story belongs to both of us now, and that's the beauty of it. And there's something mysterious. I think you just have to see the art as separate than yourself. There's this problematic idea about the flawed creator and then not being able to receive the art made by a flawed creator. I find the most convincing argument against that, for me, is that idea that that art belongs to the creator, the creative, because that's devaluing to the receiver of the art. And the receiver of the art has actually a lot of power over it to make the piece of art into whatever the receiver wants it to be. So why give the creative so much power and say, this is a flawed creator, we're gonna cancel this piece of art? I feel like that's giving them a lot of power. So I think seeing the art as a separate thing from both the person creating it and the person receiving it and the wider community, art itself exists. And there's that mystery around that. And I think Madeline L'Engle talks about the mystery of the art itself having a life of its own, having a voice of its own, almost like we give birth to it. She talks about it almost as like Mary gave birth to Jesus, like that idea of incubating and being a womb for this thing that is going to come into the world and do what it will do. And you don't have any idea what it's going to do at the end of the day. And if you try to control what it does, then once again, you're being a propaganda. You're generating propaganda, or you're generating, and if you want to get people to think a certain way, it's propaganda. If you want to get people to feel a certain way, sentimental or patriotic, you're having too much control over the work. So you have to kind of see the work in and of itself as a mysterious thing that is coming through you and being offered through you, but doesn't. There's that wonderful song. I just thought of it. I think it's, who sings it? Our children. Destiny something. Our children are not our own. They are the sons and daughters of life. They come through you. They do not belong to you. Well, I think that's definitely true of art as well. And so that's what I would say, is that, and that's one of my practices, is to liberate the art, liberate it, and don't try to control it. Let it be what it wants to be without getting in the way so much.
I always like asking this question
Okay.
because I believe that pastors, clergy, people involved in ministry and leadership, that they do have a big voice in shaping culture. It's less than what it was, but it's still a good amount of heft to it. So, if you were able to have, like in Hermione's magic bag, all of the pastors were inside of a room, and you got to talk to all of them, and they all had to listen to you, and they had to listen to you with a smile on their face so that they're more receptive, what would you want to tell them?
Well, I have one that I've been married to for quite a long time, so I get fearful all the time. Uh, I think it would be that I would want to affirm their creativity and what they do, because the art of homiletics and preaching and the teaching that I've received, sitting and receiving, that I still receive every Sunday and other days when I go and hear the beauty of liturgy, the ancient prayers, the generation of a beautiful service or mass. That creative work that they do, it it provides a bedrock for us, right? So much of what comes into my art, I would hope if I'm liberating the art, would come from what's sort of under the waterline of my consciousness. It's coming from what is shaped in my heart, and that really is from the messages I've heard for however long I've been a Christian. I've heard so much good teaching and so much good preaching and so many beautiful services and liturgies and masses. And so I would try to encourage them to keep being as creative as they can be, because I think it is a work of creativity to generate a beautiful worship service and a very well composed sermon short. But let's um but there is a beauty to it all, and I think that the faithful beauty of the work of a priest, pastor, or whoever is, creates in us, under our consciousness, that deep bedrock of what is taught in the traditions of the church and in scripture, that will hopefully not, and even if I'm not going to consciously write about it, which I don't do in many of my books, there's not a lot of outright Christian stuff, but hopefully it will permeate as Catherine Patterson said, that those of us who care about our faith and a hurting world should strive to put it in the bones of our work, of our art, the beauty, the truth, the goodness, the courage, the things that are modeled for us in the Gospels, right? Those things should be in the bones of our stories and beyond the Gospel. Not put them on like frilly dress, right? That should be in the bones of our. So I would tell that room full of faithful people who have tried to equip the saints. I would say, keep doing your creative, beautiful work. Pour your creativity out for us. We need it. And what you're doing is you're generating in us enough truth, beauty, and goodness so that it can be in the bones of our work. And I would try to honor that for them. Yeah.
That is very cool. And yeah, very cool. Thank you very much. This is most enjoyable. For everybody, I've got some questions coming in.
Good.
If
Bring
there
on the
is,
question, right? I like good, hard questions. When I do my book talks, I always have a plant of somebody that I know is going to ask a really tough, good question. I'm like, keep me on my toes.
so you heard her. If anyone has a good tough question, you can also put that in there as well.
I see something in the chat there. Did somebody drop something in the chat? Oh, the Tina light. Oh, good. Thank you for that comment, Tina.
Okay, let me just get. Okay.
As I tell the kids, I'll always tell you the truth. No question is too dumb or too small. Just anything you want to talk about. Maybe you could share something that will benefit all of us. So gather your courage and ask. I'm so intimidating. No, you can ask me whatever you want.
Okay. You mentioned the loving gaze of art and being seen by art. Do you have any practices that have been valuable to you in nurturing the capacity to be seen by art?
Let's see. Do I have any practices? Well, yeah, I think it's all about the slow pace. So I remember when I went to the Louvre and I was by myself, and of course everyone wants to see the Mona Lisa, right? So hordes are rushing in that room, and I thought, well, I'm here for what? I have 2 hours. I probably should see the Mona Lisa. So I'm being pushed along with the hordes and running up as fast as I can to try to see the Mona Lisa, the Mona Lisa. And I kind of shoved aside, and I couldn't see the art. But then to the right of the room, there was this incredible painting, and I was just me. Everyone, they were just, and it was just me in front of this painting. And so I gathered my breath, took a deep breath, and I began to take. And it was this a depiction of, the woman who's accused of adultery, and it was it was this beautiful, large painting, and so I took my time. I just stood there and I took it in, and it was the expressions, the nonverbals, the gestures, and the story of this woman has always been meaningful to me because, of course, Jesus stoops down and writes in the dirt, and what happened in the painting was I'd never realized this, but all of those men who were the moment the artist depicted was the moment when Jesus was writing in the sand. And I knew that all of them had been gazing at her. And so here's this woman staring at her, shaming her. But then as he was writing in the sand, their faces were now looking to see what he was seeing, what he was doing. And so I think as I slowed down and I took in that art, it was that idea of Jesus not just championing her, but also drawing away their condemning, shaming looks onto himself and what he was doing. And it just was this deep, profound reflection of what Jesus did for me in my life. So I think it was the slowing down and sitting there in front of that one piece that allowed me to take in the beauty of that piece as it spoke to me. Right. And Lorenzo Lotto was the artist, some Renaissance guy, some Italian guy painting it. And I'm sure he didn't think about some bedraggled Bengali woman coming into the Louvre, pushed inside by the hordes, and what she could see. But oh gosh, again, I took it in and I received it. And so, yeah, the mediation of a piece of art by God to the receiver can only happen when we slow down, I think. So, yeah, and I think crossing media. So when you go to an art museum, not to have to feel like you have to see everything. And I'll just share to counter this practice, I took our two 12-year-olds, our boys were 10, no, they were 10, to the Boston Art Museum. And I thought this would be a great cultural experience. Let's do this thing. And so I told them, well, to get them through it, because they love dogs, I said, we'll stop and have a great lunch in the museum restaurant when we see 8 dogs. I just want you to find 8 paintings of dogs. My mistake for that. So they were going, but unfortunately, they were 10-year-old boys. So I'd say there's a dog. Oh my gosh, there's a naked lady. Oh my God, the naked guy. We got like 6 dogs and 20 naked people. And I called it a day. I was like, let's go eat. So, so there's slowing and then there's appropriate. I do love going to art museums on my own. I love it. And I love putting in my earbuds and listening to music and taking in a slow walk and not having to see everything, but just to see what's speaking to me in the moment. Yeah. And I do invite you into that time. I like it. It's a very contemplative time for me to walk with our Lord and have him walk with me, this art, visual
Mhm.
art.
Mhm. Mhm.
And
Do you think so? The idea of slow cooking, slow a lot of different things, has been gaining popularity, especially maybe like 10 years ago. There's a number of books that came out. Um, from what you see, do you think that the idea of slow is becoming increasingly, like not in a thin way, but in a real meaningful way? Do you think it's becoming increasingly um, um, important to people? Like, do you see that in various things that you read or people, churches?
I think it is. I think there's a hunger for it for sure. And I see it in kids. They're being pushed along. There's this huge just glut of social and media pressure pushes fast from one thing to the next. And we're all longing for it. I think we're created for it. There's that wonderful book called 3 Mile an Hour God by a Dutch theologian. And I walk really slowly, you guys. I do not walk fast. And my friends were like, come on, Mitali. I'm like, no, no, 3 Mile an Hour God. That's the pace of a water buffalo. And that's the pace I think Jesus walked in. Just sort of slow down enough to talk, to chat, to see things. I'm just a slow walker. So and I think that's probably our generation as we get older. Some of you have grandchildren, I know. And one of the beauties of being a grandparent that I saw with my mother-in-law especially, she was amazing with she just slowed it down. She'd spend hours playing Monopoly with them and they loved it. Or she'd make pancakes. It was all slow. And so I think a gift as we get older is that gift of letting people slow down with us and um, take in that present moment. Just breathe it in all 5 senses. And there is that incredible need for us to leave Chronos time that relentless pressure generations have trod, have trod, have trod. Gerard Manley Hopkins writes about that in that beautiful poem. But we all long just to not be pushed along by history or shoved in time. And so art does allow us to get free from that. When we generate it, we're in the flow. It's like, oh my gosh, 3 hours went by. What happened? And you can escape that relentless pressure both by making and receiving. I think art and nature, of course, God's art, both allow us to get some relief from that relentless pressure of chronological history that is the big events and the things that feel so overwhelming to our small souls. So here is the gift of creation and the gift of artistic creation, as well as the beauty of nature, to allow us to escape that for a little bit, which I think is a gift. Come on, you guys have a question. I know you're doing it shy.
So
Pop it in the chat. You can pop it in the chat if you don't want to speak up.
Carolyn Stan asked,
Oh, good.
so they, quote, liberate the art, let it be what it wants to be, end quote. Do you think this applies to the child in us? How can we liberate the heart, the center of our being held by the child in us? Going further, as parents, how can we liberate our children to be all that they want to be?
Oh, I love that, Carolyn Stan. I know you guys do this for beautiful grandchildren and your children. So, yeah, when I go to speak to third graders and I say, how many of you are artists? Every single hand goes up, right? They're all 8-year-olds are convinced they make beautiful things. And then you ask adults, how many of you are artists or writers? And everyone's like, I don't know. I don't talk about it. I'm kind of embarrassed. And so we lose that play that we get when we just liberate it. It can, it doesn't have to be excellent. None of us are going to make the next Rodin sculpture. Or maybe one of you will, but I sure am not going to make the next great, I'm going to create something maybe that has a delightful thing or two in it, but I'm not going to be create something. I'm not aiming for that. I'm just aiming to play and invite people into the play of my work. So yes, I think there is that, when Jesus said, be like a child, part of it is make things and love the things you make and play with them and be good to the things you make, because kids will put up their, it's so fun to put them on their refrigerator or, here's my Lego sculpture. And you just hear mom says, wow. And then the Lego sculpture breaks and you step on it and hurt your foot. And, it's just, but they want that admiration of it. So why not us? And our churches can be places like that where we bring our art together and we can say, wow, I love that. Look at that. You had fun with that. Tell me more about making it. And I love that question, Carol and Stan, because play is so important and art does give us a chance to play. And so then we do liberate the child in us. And then in that way, we can be with children and our grandchildren in a way that isn't about productivity or utility or that relentless passage of human history. It's about being in the moment and letting each other play together. And yeah, it's both missional, what you asked, to give that to the next generation, but also for yourselves to just play. It's permission to play. I'm giving you all permission just to play and make things that are going to fall apart and hurt people's feet. That's going to be a little permission.
And I think that also speaks a little bit to leisure has been coming more in vogue. And again, a proper understanding of leisure. Leisure isn't just about watching TV. I mean, it might be if you're watching it meaningfully, but leisure in terms of spending our lives doing meaningful things. And you use the word like not utilitarian, not for a utilitarian purpose. Just go and smell the roses and smell the things and be filled with wonder and be alive to the creation of the world without thinking about what am I producing or am I making money? There's a reality we have to eat, but yeah.
Yeah, that's true. But yeah, and of course, that's why I draw such pleasure in seeing the work of like the Indiegogo artists of now I'm forgetting the countries in Ethiopia, where they create color, they mix dye in with manure, and then they decorate their houses with an incredibly symmetrical, beautiful pattern. And they talk and they laugh. And they don't have to do that, but they do. And they're trying to milk their cows and bring water, and yet they have this time that they are enjoying making their houses, their huts more beautiful. Well, there's something human and beautiful about that, right? So, yeah, it's not just a part of being privileged; it's part of being human. So, so I like that part of it. You know, when you see people who are on the margin and they're making and they're taking joy in making. Yeah, it's definitely something that is very part of being, what is that? The glory of God as a human being fully alive,
Okay.
Irenaeus. There's something about that that's marvelous. Yeah. And even in this inside, I visited kids recently at the UC Davis terminal cancer or ward children. And I was doing a visiting author residency at UC Davis, and one of the things I had to do was go and visit these kids and talk to them. And they wanted to share their stories with me. That's what they wanted to do. They wanted to tell me about a story, the idea they had, and what they were making. And my job was just to say, "Wow, so cool. I love what you drew, and that I love what you that idea for a story." And so yeah, there's that with every breath, until our last breath, and of course, um, of course, we may end up disabled at the very end of our life, but we can still say, I mean, that's something that's beautiful about music, right? You think about how songs, I remember when my mother-in-law couldn't speak, couldn't eat, couldn't do anything, but oh, when I sang a hymn to her, eyes lit up, right? She was able to receive, and she would try to mouth the words. There's something about music that doesn't leave us till the very, very last breath, the receiving of music. So yeah, I definitely think it's part of our mission as God's church to keep calling that forth out of ourselves and others. Thank you for that wonderful question, Carol and Stan. I know you both are making things. Carol and Stan are joining me. I'm doing a writing retreat up in Cupertino. That you're all welcome to join. There's 3 spots left, and we're just gonna gather together in community and write. Carol and Stan, we did that last year. We meet in the morning. We set our intention for the day. We encourage each other, and then we just go and create. And then we meet in the evening, and then Stan wrote haikus, which were amazing. And we shared our work at the end and each gave joy to each other. So you're all welcome to join that retreat if you're interested in doing something creative. But there's only 3 spots left. So you better sign up quick.
Okay, I've got one that's a bit of a mouthful. Hopefully, I can get this right. Okay. Your approach to art is anti-consumptive, both in the creating and receiving, especially in how you talk about affirming the dignity of the individual creators and wanting to know their stories. Do you suggest any particular practices we could cultivate to make the creation and receiving of art as protest against capitalistic, consumeristic politics?
Yeah. Okay. So here's where social media comes in for me. And I talk about social media at the beginning of the book. So um, there are a lot of people I think who left Twitter when it became X, but I stayed. And the reason I stayed is because when it comes to women in places like Afghanistan or Iran, their protests have been generated through social media. And there are artists who are creating, I mean, I have a whole chapter in my book about it. There are young artists who create art based on some sort of horrible somebody who was imprisoned and then never seen again, and they generate a piece of art relating to like there was a whole thing about hair. There was a woman who was imprisoned and beaten to death because she didn't cover her hair, and so an artist generated something about hair, a beautiful piece about just hair, and that was shared and shared and shared and shared, and just incited so much hope and courage for young women who can no longer go to school in Afghanistan, let alone even take a breath. So I think receiving their voices of protest is an important part of my presence there on social media. I like to I follow a lot of artists from those corners of the world. They use social media really powerfully. A lot of them are women. In fact, that's why I think sometimes influencers are looked down on. And most of the influencers are women, young women of color. And they've used social media to generate some economic power for themselves and political power. So in answer to your question, I do like that part of social media, and I try to really follow hashtags and also people generating art who are from those marginalized places that I can celebrate, I can encourage them, I can receive it, and I can reshare them. So I try to do that. That's one way um, to make art more revolutionary, and it has changed things. It's giving people hope in places where there is no hope at all. And for us here, yeah, of course, there's different there's it does it it's like that going back to that quote from Damon of Athens, like you can make our laws, but you don't have our hearts. You don't have our minds. And so we can continue to support artists. And the thing we have to really restrain ourselves from, though, is, as I said, is, you can always, even children. I just judged a picture book contest, 350 picture books I read. And then a lot of them were knee-jerk responses to the moment, in that they were very preachy, very heavy-handed. They had a lot of agendas of adults trying to alleviate their social conscience by putting in some heavy message in for kids. And it just felt so, I don't know, like kids can sense that a mile away. I mean, who wants to be preached to from a picture book? Nobody does. So it was disappointing. Both on both sides of the political spectrum, books were being used for some sort of message, and as a pulpit. Picture books shouldn't be pulpits. So so we have to guard ourselves from, like I said, shifting into propaganda or kitsch, and really allow the art to speak. And that has to come from a bedrock within our lives, right? So if we want to generate the kind of art that is going to be the songs that change a nation, or hurting somebody, or give them the courage or conviction to stand up for something true, it has to come from what's underneath our waterline. And so that goes back to just being, crossing borders. One of the other practices I talk about is crossing borders in real life. And someone told me once, if you're going to cross a border to create a story, you better do that in real life first. Go across the border, shut up, and hold a bunch of babies for a long time over there. And then maybe you could even venture to think about writing a story in that place. Yeah. So there is that idea that our life has to really have the depth of practice that will be able to come through the under the waterline into our art, so that it is the kind of art that changes hearts and minds and allows people to see what is true, good, and beautiful in a time when people are lying to us, people are ugly, and there's a lot of evil. So we want truth, goodness, and beauty to combat that. And it has to be in our lives in a deep way in order to come out into our art. Hopefully that's helpful.
Very. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm no good at this. I get all riled up myself. I get all knee jerk, and I've written my fair share of sentimental things or kitschy things or propaganda things, and I've done it myself. So don't look at what I I don't know. I'm trying though. I'm really trying to flow with this. I'm trying to trust that in my art, if I can do it in my life, I'm just trying to leave more room for that to come through in a way that isn't coercive or commandeering of children who are going to read my story. I'm trying, failing and trying, failing and trying. Come join me in failing and trying, failing and
I'm going to cheat and ask one of my own.
Okay.
In terms of, and I don't want to take away what, because what you're talking about is really, really good and meaningful and worthwhile. And if you have more to say, feel free. Something in your book you talked about in finding third places. And I thought, I've read a few different books on art and art making. But it had some really nice practical things in it, the finding the third places. You talk about, neighborhood third places, and then you also talk about social media. And I thought that's actually pretty smart, because it's easy, perhaps as a want to be artist. Well, the world should just love my stuff, so I shouldn't actually have to take these steps in making this effort to go out and seek an audience, kind of. But you do it really, really nice for the people who are creators, which is all of us. Can you talk more about the finding third places?
Yeah, so it goes back to that idea that the art doesn't belong to you, but also to the recipient of it. Like for me, when I read my story to a child in my lap, that is a different experience than when I'm just sitting and creating my story, right? So how am I going to get a kid to come and hear my story? Well, the Third Spaces idea is very much, it used to be about neighborhoods. It's about churches and community centers and coffee shops and places where art can be presented that can actually be embodied, the presenter as well as the receiver. Very important spaces. For us, it's so encouraging when you see the recipients of kids in a library that are hearing your story. It's just, there's nothing like it. Their eyes wide, their hearts open, then actually just hoping that your book will reach some bestseller lists somehow. There's something very powerful and generative about it. So Third Spaces are, I think it's a new era. People always say, oh, the good old days. Well, the good old days meant a few rich white guys made decisions about who was gonna let art, what art was gonna make the bestseller list or be shown in museums or be great art. The good old days were very, there's just few people that made a decision. I say bring us to the now. It's much more of a leveling of access between the receiver and creator of art, both digitally and in neighborhood spaces. And it's so heartening and encouraging. So it's really one of the practices that can keep you making. So if you have the courage to go up and I was, I was at a restaurant in Lafayette, California, right near where I live, and I saw this beautiful painting of St. Mary's College of California. It was hanging on the wall of the restaurant. And I noticed, of course, there's a price tag on it. And I thought, that painting, our boys went to St. Mary's. I taught there. I loved that chapel, the hills, just something about the composition of it just reminded me of that time of our lives that was a sweet time. So I went and looked up the artist, Karina Swain. She's one of the artists in my book. And I bought that piece of art. And I thought, what if she hadn't had the courage to approach that restaurant owner and say, hey, I'm a local artist. I would love to, I'm offering my art on the wall for you. And the restaurant owner said, heck yeah, that sounds great. And I bought it and I love that painting. So she had courage to do that. She's not famous by any means, but she's famous to me now because I walk by that painting every day and I take it in, right? Um, so we have to gather our courage and ask people, approach people. Maybe it's the gym, maybe it's the church, maybe it's somewhere, and you say, listen, my art's not great, but maybe it'll give someone joy. So can I share this with you? And unfortunately, sometimes maybe it isn't good. So, you'll get no's. And then I talk about another practice, which is work on your craft, get better. You can always just do that. And there's no excuse to say, oh, yeah, my art's great at the way it is. No, we have to get better. I'm still trying to get better. I want my craft to get better every day. And so we have to keep working on our craft and making it good enough for some restaurant guy or somebody to say, yeah, I like this. I'll hang it in my and then we have that third space, and then we have access to people who can enjoy it, and then we can receive the blessing of that encouragement of people actually buying our stuff, or Etsy, digital places too. And there's pros and cons of each one of presenting our art online. You have Kindle, you can self-publish now in a way that we never were able to when I started working in this. There was no self-publishing. It was all traditional publishing and only a few gatekeepers. Well, now you can put your stuff up and have people enjoy it. And maybe down the road someone will buy it. Maybe they won't. Maybe they'll just enjoy it. But there's lots of spaces now to share art. So I'm not one of these make the art world great again kind of person. I'm like, today is a good day where we can share this thing locally, embodied, as well as digitally. And many, many people can have access to it.
Mhm. Mhm. Cool. Cool.
Yeah, I sold. Those are some of my practices. It's not a very thick book, but hopefully I have discussion questions at the end. What I'd love to see is that, and I'm hearing a little rumors of this here and there, people gathering together and discussing the questions in community. So there's practices like to restore agency in the vocation, and the question there is, what steps can you take to hone craft, master the rules of the market, and build collegial relationships? Like those questions in community will help, and that's practice one, is to get back your agency. Don't feel like, oh, I've been rejected, these publishers don't want my work, or shouldn't have all the power. You can reclaim power it's you. I remember once I wanted an agent so badly, a literary agent. Everybody wants one. And I remember going to a conference, and there was all these agents and editors and all these authors just trying to get a moment with these agents and editors. And I sat there and I remember it struck me. they'd be nowhere without us. They'd have nothing to sell and nothing to publish. If it wasn't for us, why are we grappling for the hem of their robes? Grappling for the hem of our robes. So come after me. Children, Dad, Mitali, you're a creative. There's whole business revolved around what we make, right? So why should they have all the agency? So I give steps to that. I'd love to see people discuss it and maybe find communities, seeking mentors in the margin, finding third places, welcome moments of mortification. We talked about that. Oh, fast to embrace your vulnerability, pursue community to counter envy, and a retreat to let anger breathe. Because anger is such a great emotion, but it can also really stifle your art if you get so PO'd over current events that you just can't even make it anything because you're just so mad about the world. So it's retreats that really help that anger to be something productive and generative in your art. So you can create that kind of revolutionary art that is not propaganda. And then rhythms of rest and work and crossing borders with the body. We talked about that. And of course, liberating the work. Those are my 10 practices. We discussed those together. Well, we've been together an hour and a half now. Aren't you guys tired of hearing me going blathering on? Margaret. Oh, thank you for that encouragement, Margaret. Margaret says, that God encourages me in my writing. Yes, I feel the presence of God in it and my meeting with the children. Yeah. Oh my gosh. If you want to have some fun and get back play, write for kids. It's so powerful. The hand that rocks the cradle rules the world. The hand that writes for children rules the world. Yeah. That's you have a high view. I have a high view of my that's like, whoa, Mitali, you're getting ahead of me now. Pull it back. Rein it in.
This has been very, very lovely. Very, 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 very lovely. The enthusiasm and the thoughts, the practicality, the theology, the philosophy. I think all of it's in there. I think it's all in there. It's really, really, really good. But you have a glorious presence. Thank you so very much. And those lucky kids that you get to talk to, you probably inspire a lot of people.
Thank you, Matthew. That's very sweet. I know. And some of you see Admin over there. Admin is Matthew's sister. And so obviously your parents did something right with both of you sitting here. I saw that your sister laughed at all my silly jokes, so I appreciate that. But yeah, so it is a joy to and I do think that there's something powerful about children that we can offer art when we engage around children with art. It is life changing. It was for me as a child. 1,400 stories, right? 1,400 stories that strengthened my soul. So yeah, I do love it.
Right. Thank you so very much again for this. This has been really, really, really fun. Is there any websites specifically? There was one about telling stories. Which are the good websites to catch you up on?
Well, there's a website for the book called justmakingguide.com. You can share that if you want to share that with your friends. And then you can find me. I'm the only Mitali Perkins on the planet, so you can find me all over. And if you want, yeah. So there's no other Mitali Perkins on earth. So you just Google me and you'll find my, Instagram, my face, my wherever I am, you can find me. And just join in. It's fun out there. Don't be scared of social media. Don't listen to the naysayers. There's good stuff out there. Oh. And I'm a fan. All right. Well, thank you so much for hosting, Happy. Thank you for your wonderful questions and your great gracious reception of my work.
Thank you so much, and thank you everybody for coming. I really appreciate it, and have a lovely, lovely evening.
Bye, everybody.
See you later.